Good morning. Continuing with Jeremiah Burroughs, the real rare jewel of Christian contentment. Today we begin with a kind of in the middle of the close of chapter 3. The issue being picked up here is the Bible gives us promises like no trouble will befall those who trust in the Lord, this sort of thing. And yet we see from experience that trouble does befall people, at times even godly people. So Burroughs is trying to help us understand why that is, what's the difference. And the first answer he gives is that under the law, most of these promises were given and they were to be understood in a more literal sense. Whereas under the gospel, we've already received so much mercy in Christ that the promises are really fulfilled through that. And now, in our afflictions, we don't face judgment because Christ has covered us, and so we do have to face afflictions, and so that's what he covered yesterday. Now, today's going to cover a couple of more reasons for that difference, and that'll close out chapter 3. So, answer number 2. Perhaps their faith does not attain to this promise, and God often brings many outward afflictions because the faith of his people does not reach the promise, and not only in the Old Testament, but in the times of the New Testament. Zechariah's time may be said to be in the time of the New Testament, when he was struck with dumbness because he did not believe. And that is given as the cause why he was struck with dumbness. But you will now say, has faith a warrant to believe deliverance, that it shall be fully delivered? I dare not say so, but it may act upon it to believe that God will make it good in his own way. Perhaps you have not done as much, and so because of that, the promise is not fulfilled to you. So number 2 is a lack of faith, of trusting in God to fulfill his promise. Burroughs doesn't go so far as to say that the promise will be fulfilled in a literal way, but he does say that this is an opportunity for us to evaluate our faith and trust in God, and to remind us that sometimes the hardships that we go through are God's means of strengthening us in faith and helping us to trust him more. Number 3, when God makes such a promise to his people, yet still it must be with this reservation, that God must have liberty for these 3 things: that notwithstanding his promise, he will have liberty to make use of anything for your chastisement; that he must have liberty to make use of your wealth or liberties or lives for the furtherance of his own ends, if it be a stumbling block to wicked and godly men. God must have liberty, though he has made a promise to you, he will not release the propriety that he has in your possessions and lives. And God must have sufficient liberty to make use of what you have, to show that his ways are unsearchable and his judgments past finding out. God reserves these 3 things in his hand still. Objection. But you will say, what good then is there in such a promise that God makes to his people? That you are under the protection of God more than others. But what comfort is this if it befalls me? Answer. You have this comfort, that the evil of it shall be taken from you, that if God will make use of this affliction for other ends, yet he will do it so as to make it up to you in some other way. Perhaps you have given your children something, but afterwards, if you had a use for that thing, you will come and say, I must have it. Why, Father, the child may say, you gave it to me. But I must have it, says the father, and I will make it up to you in some other way. The child does not think that the father's love is ever a whit the less to him. So when there is any such promise as this, that God by his promise gives you protection, and yet for all that such a thing befalls you, it is only as if the father should say, I gave you that indeed, but let me have it, and I will make it up to you in some other way that shall be as good. God says, let me have your health and liberty and life, and it shall be made up to you in some other way. 2. Whenever the plague or pestilence comes to those who are under such a promise, it is for some special and notable work, and God requires them to search and examine in a special manner to find out his meaning. There is so much to be learned in the promise that God has made concerning this particular evil, that the people of God may come to quiet and content their hearts in this affliction. I read in this psalm that God has made a promise to his people to deliver them from plague and pestilence, and yet I find that it has come. It may be that I have not made use of my faith in this promise heretofore. And if God brings afflictions upon me, he will yet make it up in some other way. God made a promise to deliver me, or at least to deliver me from all the evil of it. Now, if this thing does befall me, and yet I have a promise of God, certainly the evil of it is taken away. This promise tells me that if it does befall me, yet it is for some notable end. And because God has a use for my life and intends to bring about his glory in some way I do not know of. And if he will come still in a fatherly way of chastisement, yet I will be satisfied in the thing. So a Christian heart, by reasoning out of the word, comes to satisfy his soul in the midst of such a heavy hand of God, and in such a distressed condition as that. Now carnal hearts do not find that power in the word, that healing virtue that is in it to heal their distracting cares and the troubles of their spirits. But when those who are godly come to hear the word, they find it, as it were, a plaster for all their wounds, and so they come to have ease and contentment in such conditions as are very grievous and miserable to others. But as for other particular promises, and more generally for the covenant of grace, how and in what a mysterious way the saints work to get contentment and satisfaction to their souls. We shall refer to these things in the next chapter. And so this chapter is ending now, so I'm going to end today. But the idea here, I think, is that when God's promise for protection comes and then it does not seem to work out in our lives, we remember that God has taken the evil away. Well, how has he taken the evil away? He's taken the evil away through the cross. It is through the work of Christ that the evil has been taken away, because the wrath of God is poured out on Jesus. And so we don't face God's wrath anymore. We're not under his judgment anymore. All of God's purposes toward us are good. But God's purposes toward us, though they are good, don't always feel good, because sometimes God, in order to strengthen our faith, stretches us, challenges us, tries us, chastises us, disciplines us, all for good, not for evil. So God's purposes toward us in the circumstances that come to us for the child of God are not evil purposes. He intends good for us. How do we know that? Obviously, Romans 8. There's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There's no separation from his love. And all between the last verse and the first verse of that great chapter are all sorts of promises that ensure God's working in our lives for good. So we can be content. And I hope that today you will find contentment in all that God has done for you in Jesus. Hope you have a great day.